Hello and welcome back to the RiftGuides WildRift video, and for today we are going to talk about the newest tier list for patch 5.8. Sorry again for not making the tier list for the last patch because, well, I got kinda sick and went to Narnia for a long time. My voice is still recovering for whatever reason because I got hit by the worst illness possible. I'm not talking about the matchmaking in WildRift, so without any further ado, let's talk about the placements in the Baron lane. With all the HP stacking happening right now in the game, Fiora has gotten even stronger than before. Mechanically a little bit more challenging than the typical picks, but definitely worth to pick up if you want to carry most of your games. This champion takes down any tank, any HP stacker, and in a solo queue environment, unless you get literally ganked on cooldown, she absolutely stomps everyone. Other champions in the S tier are relatively strong as well, and are also decently powerful into tanky champions. For example, this Snip lady. She has gotten a good buff on her Q, giving her even more damage, and she will actually just completely demolish you if things go right for her. Other champions, such as Set, are also very scary, especially if the enemy team picks a tank champion. Then you can just throw the tank into the enemy team and completely annihilate them. For the placements in general is something that you need to know about this list. As per usual, it's a very simplified list. It has only like 3 tiers and 1 pick of the patch, making champions appear very close to each other, even though there are very clear distinctions in power. Again, they're also not necessarily in order, so keep that in mind. So for example, the S tier would usually have 3 tiers in itself, the A tier as well, and the B tier as well, but if I did this in this list, it would absolutely blow up. This is something I'd rather like to do with the more detailed list I'll be talking about on stream at some point, and then you get the ideas why the champions are placed like this, and then we can have a discussion about this on stream. For the tanks, we have Dr. Mundo as the pick of the patch. He's very powerful, deals a lot of damage, and Titanic Hydra and Heartsteel just suit him so well. Other champions such as Garen and Sion, Shen and Ornn are also very powerful in their own regard and are just very good depending on what you have to do. But most of the time, picking one of the carry champions is better for snowballing games, but Mundo is a carry, technically speaking at least. He has so much damage, is so tanky, and he's truly one of the wonderful champions of this patch. Now let's talk about the jungle position. Here a more detailed list would be very helpful because, as you see in the S tier, there's so many champions clumped up. For example, let's talk about the few champions here. Lee Sin is still the pinnacle of this tier list because he's just too goddamn broken. Other champions such as Kha'Zix, Hecarim, and Evelynn are very powerful in their own regard and are basically the champions right beneath or equally on par with Lee Sin. Champions such as Nyla require a lot of time farming, Kayn is more like a cheesy champion, Pantheon is very powerful. Like, you see, all these champions are very powerful, and if I had 3 different tiers in the S tier in this list, they would all be a little bit more differentiated, and you would see that Kha'Zix, Hecarim, and Evelynn would be basically always pickable, the same as Lee Sin. Looking into the A tier, it's a little bit of a different story. These champions are not always just blind pickable and have certain weaknesses that you have to keep in mind. Aatrox is probably the best snowballing one out of all of these, with then Zed following up and Yone being a hyper carry. All the other champions there really have big weaknesses and either require too much time to scale or just don't do as much as the S tier equivalent. For the B tier, here we have a lot of issue champions. For example, Kayle. If matchmaking in WildRift was not unfair and people wouldn't be climbing for being bad and you wouldn't just constantly play in Masters Elo regardless of your rank, Kayle would in reality be a very low B tier champion, like B-. But in reality, Kayle can actually also be an S tier, simply for the fact that you're constantly facing worse players, and if you're able to farm AFK for the 15 minutes to 20 minutes because nobody ends games, your champion will become powerful. But yeah, as per usual, rather stay away from champions in the B tier with a few exceptions, for example, Fiora. For the tank tier, there's not many changes. You can technically say that you can put Dr. Mundo into the tank highest tier, but Volibear also is very powerful, simply because he can just dive for fun. All the other champions basically do a similar job, and again, if I were to differentiate these picks into S+, S-, and S tier, Dr. Mundo and Nunu and all these champions would be so much more clearly defined in there, but this is just to give you a proper view on what you can basically pick in most of your games, which is the entire purpose of this list. There's not much you can do wrong by just picking these champions here, and if it's lower in A or B tier, it's more situational. Now let's talk about the mid lane. Here we start with the mage tier. Aurelion Sol has made a big impact. This champion is very powerful and very broken in its own regard, and basically a pick or ban champion nowadays. Other champions in the S tier, for example Zoe, require you to play very well and to just dominate in the early, mid and late game, and you still expose yourself to certain risk all of the time. Orianna on the other hand doesn't have to do so, but her early game is much weaker. Lux is basically like a good all-rounder, well balanced in the early game and super unbalanced in the late game if she gets to hit, but very immobile. Syndra also, since she's gotten buffed, has been very powerful. She never really lacked damage, but more like survivability. So with playing her correctly and utilizing her high range, she's a very powerful pick. And as for the A tier, since we got a buff to Ziggs, it will take some time to see if Ziggs can be a true S tier champion, or if he'll be in the A tier or maybe like in the A plus tier in a differentiated list. And as for the B tier, some of these champions require you to actually go in and suicide for your team, or they take too long to scale, or they just don't do anything in the early to mid game, so you can't get anything done. So again, in a perfect WildRift world, these champions would be completely useless, or you would see them get stomped entirely through the laning phase by better champions. For the assassins, Cassidy is one of the most broken champions in this game. Similar to the Kayle effect, there's one thing though that's kind of different. Cassidy compared to Kayle really starts spiking starting on level 5, where he can actually just one-tap you. He has enough damage as a scaling champion on level 5 to 100 to 0 you unless you have bone plating, and even then it gets kinda dicey. And all the champions below do a similar job but are not as secure in the late game like a Cassidy is. So for example, a Fizz is more potent in the early game, a Diana is more important, and Ahri is more potent in a sense of proactivity, and an Akali can be very powerful, but in the late game they're all outclassed by Cassidy simply for the fact that he's so easy to play in a sense of dealing damage without having to rely on heavy mechanics. It's more about choosing when to go in, and then you just wipe anything, even a 3000 HP tank Leona. For the other tier, nothing much has changed, and Draven is still the most powerful pick in the mid lane. However, Irelia has moved up quite a lot simply because she got so much stronger over time, but she's also very difficult to play. And the same applies as per usual, ban Yasuo. This champion is utter cringe to play against for any range type champion, and just generally because this champion simply doesn't die. There's one thing though that we need to talk about, and it's Lucian. Lucian in theory is an easy S tier champion, but it is so difficult for Lucian to translate early game leads into closing out a game because this champion is very vulnerable and requires you to be on pixel performance, like perfect performance, to really draw out every single bit of potential you have to make Lucian really broken. Now let's move over to the AD carry tier list. Tristana is still the best champion, being a very powerful all-rounder in the early, mid and late game with the weakest points from level 1 to 5. Level 5 she is then strong enough to instantly one-tap somebody if he doesn't have exhaust. Other champions can be classified as super lane bullies such as Jhin, Caitlyn, Zarya, Varus, and even Lucian and Samira. However, there are a few things you need to know when it comes to other champions in this list, like as Samira and Draven. These champions want to generate lead through laning phases and require certain support most of the time to perform accordingly. If they don't get anything done during the laning phase, they fall off a cliff very soon after. Other champions require you to win lanes such as Caitlyn, but even alone she can do so very splendidly. So technically speaking, every champion in the S tier is very good in their own regards, but again, if I were to make this more complex, there would be like all these conditions to these champions like attached to them, so you would understand why and when to pick them to then properly have an impact. But in the solo queue context, there's nothing wrong with most of the time just either picking, for example, Zarya and Ezreal, or just going Lucian if you're really mechanically skilled. In a more competitive environment though, you'd most of the time see Varus because this champion is cringe broken, was broken, and will probably for all eternity remain broken. Some secretly broken champions, or rather really powerful laning champions, are Misfortune and Ashe. Like these two champions, even Jinx is very good on lane by the way, have a very powerful lane, but they have one big issue. Their survivability is very low, and therefore they can get caught off guard many times, and then things are very, well, dire for them. However, they still feature a lot of damage, and conditionally speaking, for example, if you have a very powerful support champion, Nyla can also be a very good AD carry, but again, conditions upon more conditions. And yeah, B tier champions, goodbye. For example, I really don't understand why Twitch had such a high win rate in China. I really do not understand. This champion didn't do any damage and was just instantly killed upon being seen. So Again, like, let me know in the comments below what the hell you guys experience with Twitch. Now for the mage tier, we have Syndra as the pick of the patch for the mages. She is very easy to pilot in the sense of if you know how to abuse her range, and then it's all about just, you know, pressing these buttons, realizing what to do and when to do, and yeah, well, basically no mechanics, just understanding what's happening. Other champions, as per usual, you know the drill. Veiga is very good into melee-centric composition, Seraphine into all-in, Lux is generally a good champion, Vex into mobile champions, Ziggs good blind pick, Orianna into melee champions, Karma if you have an AD carry on the mid lane or just need some more power to just have a quote-unquote fake enchanter, and Zoe is very good for pick on all-in. And for the A tier, usually Morgana is only a really good champion if you have a Leona, because you instantly proc her passive on cooldown, as I've said 10,000 times. Now let's move over to the support role. Here we have the engaged tier with Leona. Okay, this champion's hitbox and tankiness isn't real, so yeah, we need to talk about this champion. It either needs a nerf to the cooldown of the ult or the hitbox adjustment, because this truly isn't fair. A few changes I have made when it comes to broken champions for competitive play, which is Galio and Gragas, I've put them lower into the A tier for solo queue, because they simply cannot play to their true potential in solo queue. It's not realistic, and therefore I just put them down and put other champions who are stronger on their own in the solo queue context into a higher tier. And yeah, one champion that has gotten more popularity would be Set. This champion, if you go for HP items and the enemy also goes for a tanky support, can turn the entire game in just one press of a button with the ultimate. Then you just go deep into the backline and one-tap the entirety of the enemy team, making this champion a very powerful entity that is probably flying under a lot of people's radar. For the Protect tier, we have Lulu as the highest pick here. Lulu does a lot of damage during the laning phase, provides a lot of decent sustain with shields, and gives the AD carry a lot of power with the help of picks and attack speed, while also giving them HP with the ultimate. So a very powerful champion when you play an AD carry centric draft. Not only this, if you also feel like you don't really want that much responsibility, she's a beautiful pick for you to just sit back, relax, and buff up either your jungle or your AD carry, or wherever or whoever the strongest person is. In the S tier, we have champions that either have very powerful sustain or laning phases, or scale very brutally into the late game without being able to be punished so harshly. Janna is very good proactively on the map, accelerating going for plays. Soraka is decently powerful starting from the laning phase to mid to late game. Yuumi is a powerful entity during the laning phase, one of the most cringe champions ever to face in lane because she's way too tanky, and Braum makes it very difficult to get anything done. He can get bullied by Sennas, yes, but there's simply nothing happening because Braum just puts up his shield upon being engaged and the AD carry can't die, and then the enemy AD carry can't hit your AD carry, and your AD carry can hit the enemy AD carry, and yeah, that is a big problem. Other champions that might be or could be placed higher are, for example, Seraphine and Nami. I put Sona into the A tier because in a solo queue environment she rarely gets punished, and with all the stuns she has now from a passive and the ultimate, she provides decent value early on. However, there's one thing I need to talk to Sona mates about: please don't undervalue Harmonic Echoes. It's literally your second ability in more powerful and really helps your champion to have giga high value with just one item. So basically, Soraka is the better Sona in early to mid game, however in late game, Sona takes over because she has better impact abilities with the help of her ultimate and just clutch CC, providing an additional source of peeling for her allies. Not to forget to mention the shielding and healing that are AoE on this champion. For the carry tier, there are a few champions that could potentially be in the highest tier, like the pick of the patch tier. We have Pyke, we have Karma, we have Senna, and we have Lux. All of these champions are very powerful in their own regard, and it really depends on how good you are to carry games. But if you're in a true solo queue context, please most of the time pick Pyke and accelerate the game, or if you play duo, Senna can be very powerful, but all these champions are super strong and you should never underestimate them. And when it comes to Ashe, she's a very powerful utility champion that has good damage during the laning phase, good poke, allows you to bully people during the laning phase, and can go for picks like no other support can do with the power of her ultimate, when it's not even committal, by the way. Other champions such as Zarya in one tier lower now are struggling kinda, at least from my perspective. To be honest though, I think with the adjustment in this patch, she might go back into the S tier, but I need more time to see how well she does, but for now I'll place her into the A tier. And the other champions like Swain and Brand are really struggling most of the time finding impact before they get killed, with the exception of Brand. If you play him in a like suicidal manner, you'll always have high damage, but again, you will die for it, so will it really be worth it if your teammates cannot like pick up the slack? Well, let me know in the comments below. And that basically ends the video for today. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and as per usual, grow a meaningful watch time, and we'll see each other for more content very soon, more Chinese reviews, and everything is coming your way. See you guys.